Would you ever call this color green and this blue? Well, that's exactly what many musicians are doing in ear training when overthinking modes in music theory, which is wrecking their progress. In this video, I'll explain why and how to fix it. If you're new here, I am Leonardo, creator of Use Your Ear, a science-based ear training method designed to help musicians deeply connect with the essence of music, feeling. Unlike traditional methods that can lead to overthinking, this approach focuses on making ear training intuitive and practical for real musical situations. So far, we've helped over 2,000 musicians who have embraced this approach and rated it as excellent on Trustpilot. Let's talk about modes and why they can actually be harmful to your ear training. Here's the problem. Ear training is all about building a strong connection between a musical element and how it sounds, or rather, how it feels. But many musicians overcomplicate things by thinking about modes when it's unnecessary and overkill. So they end up using different names for the same sound, making it much harder to establish a clear mental association. Let me give you a visual parallel to make this clearer. We have many different colors we can see, and we obviously have a name for each one. This is essential. It helps us internalize the colors and associate each one with its specific name. Are you with me? Now imagine if we started calling the same color by different names. For example, what if we labeled the same color as blue, red, and green simultaneously? You'd feel confused, right? You wouldn't know which color is actually green or red or blue. Would you ever do something like that? Of course not. But sadly, this is what many musicians do when it comes to ear training. In Western music, everything is essentially based on the structure of the major key. All modes, whether Dorian, Aeolian, Phrygian, etc., are built on the same framework. They're just the major key starting from different degrees. For example, the Dorian mode is simply the major key starting on the second degree, and the Aeolian mode, or minor key, is the major key starting on the sixth degree. Despite these different names, the underlying structure is always the same. This structure always has the same 7 core notes, or scale degrees, and each of these notes has its own specific feeling. The same applies to chords. There are 7 chords, each built on one of the scale degrees, and each one has a distinct feeling based on the degree it's built upon. Now, I'm simplifying things here, but this isn't far from how most songs work. We have one main structure, and within that structure, those 7 notes and 7 chords define the palette of sounds and feelings we hear in most songs. This is the core vocabulary of music. It's just 7 distinct feelings. Now, guess what happens when musicians think in modes? We end up calling the same musical feeling by different names. Just like in the color example I explained earlier. For example, in the Phrygian mode, the tonic, or first degree of the Phrygian mode, is just the third degree of the major key, and it feels like the third degree of the major key. But when you think of it as the first degree of Phrygian, it's easy to mistakenly think it should feel like a tonic, like it should have the typical resolution feeling of the tonic of the major key. In reality, the tonic of the Phrygian mode doesn't have the same resolution feeling as the tonic of the major key at all. It always feels like the third degree of the major scale, nothing more. The same concept applies to all other modes. This issue comes from overcomplicating things with modes. So while modes are an interesting concept and can be useful for teaching and visualization and whatever else, most often than not, they add unnecessary complexity to ear training. Modes are essentially the major scale starting from different points, and calling them by different names doesn't change how they feel or function musically from our perception. The key point for effective ear training is to call each musical element by a single name, to maintain the consistency needed to fully internalize the 7 core musical feelings. Luckily, for 99% of the music we listen to, we don't need to think about modes at all. Western music can be understood simply by using the major key structure, even when the song is in a minor key, for example. The only difference is that the minor tonal center, the 6th degree of the major scale, is emphasized more than the major tonal center. While there may be some exceptions, which I'll explain later, my suggestion for most musicians, probably 95% of you watching this video, is to avoid thinking in modes altogether. Instead, always interpret a song's notes and chords in terms of the major key. For example, if you perceive a song as being in the natural minor key, consider the minor tonic as the 6th degree of the relative major key. This way, you're consistently associating the same musical feeling with the same name. The 1st degree will always feel like the tonic of the major key, the point of total resolution, while the 6th degree will always carry the feeling of the minor tonal center, and so on for all the other degrees as well. From my experience, both personally and after teaching ear training to more than 2,000 musicians, this approach is by far the best. It helps you lock in the association between each of the 7 core feelings and their names, making the learning process way quicker and smoother. It also streamlines your thought process during ear training, making all tasks easier and more efficient. Instead of overloading your brain with multiple concepts, simply find the 1st degree of the major key and determine where each note and chord fits within that framework. This makes recognition way faster and more accurate. Now, as I said earlier, there are some exceptions where it would make sense to think in different ways. The first exception is for those of you that are taking an exam or audition that requires you to specifically write out answers using a minor key or a particular mode. Of course, in that case, you need to use the right nomenclature. So you'll need to train both ways, thinking in major, minor, and if needed, even other modes separately. The second exception is if you're a very advanced musician playing or studying advanced styles of music where modes are actually part of the structure, like some jazz or classical compositions. Then modes may become more relevant. But these are very advanced musical pieces, and I strongly discourage beginner and intermediate musicians from focusing on them. Why? Because if you don't have the basic ear training skills in place, it's like trying to run without being able to walk. Ear training skills develop like a pyramid. You need to build a solid foundation of basic skills before advancing to more complex ones. Skipping ahead will only lead to getting stuck and feeling frustrated, which is the most common issue musicians face in ear training. To help address this and other issues, we created a free online workshop where you can assess your current skill level and receive science-based exercises and strategies to improve your ear. By the end of the workshop, you'll know exactly what steps to take to significantly improve your ear training skills quickly. Click the link below to register for free. If you're not quite ready for our workshop, check out this video where I explain the first ear training goal every musician should focus on and how advanced concepts like modal music can hinder progress if you haven't mastered that goal yet.